In mid-March, the cruise lines did something unimaginable just a few months earlier. The industry as a whole opted to suspend new sailings in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. From that point onward, no new cruises would sail. The pandemic, which at that time was still in its infancy compared to the number of cases seen today, was quickly spreading around the globe. It had already impacted cruise ships, and it was obviously easy to spread among people being close to one another. The pandemic and the subsequent shutdown of cruising has cost the cruise lines billions of dollars in lost revenue. But in hindsight, we know it was obviously the right move, given what we've seen. But what you might not know about the cruising suspension could surprise you. Number 1, if your cruise is canceled, you may actually come out ahead. With these suspensions, it's been a hard hit to the industry and a major disruption. But many people that have been impacted by canceled cruises are actually benefiting. That's because cruise lines are pulling out all the stops to get people to rebook their canceled trips. On canceled cruises, passengers can opt for a 100% cash refund or get more compensation for sticking with a different cruise. Carnival, for example, is offering a cruise credit plus either $300 or $600 in onboard credit if you rebook. Royal Caribbean and Norwegian are offering a cruise credit of 125% if you opt to rebook a future cruise instead of getting your money back. So for example, if you paid $1,000 for your canceled cruise, you can get $1,250 to spend on a future trip. The second thing you might not know about the cruise suspension is that there's actually a no-sail order from the CDC. While the suspension of cruising was voluntary, it doesn't mean that cruise lines can simply elect to start sailing again whenever they feel comfortable. The Centers for Disease Control has a no-sail order in place. According to the CDC, quote, "This order ceases operations of cruise ships in waters in which the United States may exert jurisdiction and requires that they develop a comprehensive, detailed operational plan approved by the CDC and the U.S. Coast Guard to address the COVID-19 pandemic." The thing is that this order may not be lifted for a while. The CDC has said the order will continue until one of the following happens. First, the Secretary of Health and Human Services declaration of COVID-19 as a public health emergency expires. Second, the CDC director rescinds or modifies the order. Or third, 100 days from the date of the order. The only one of those three circumstances with a defined date is the 100-day order. With the order modified in early April, the 100 days from then would mean late July before the order is lifted. Number 3 might surprise a lot of people, but right now cruise ships are just hanging out just off the coast. So what do you do with a cruise ship when it has no passengers? In this case, the cruise lines are keeping them near ports. This image from cruisemapper.com shows dozens of cruise ships off the coast of Florida. Ships will come in and dock at the port, take on any needed supplies, and then head back to sail around the coast. With so many cruise ships and nowhere to sail, there's simply too many to simply dock and wait out the crisis. There aren't enough spots for these huge ships. Therefore, they are taking turns coming and going, and in some cases, just hanging a few miles off of the coast. Number 4, there are still 80,000 crew members on cruise ships around the United States. While there are no passengers on cruise ships, there are thousands of crew members still sailing. According to a CDC statement made in early April, quote, "Currently there are approximately 100 cruise ships remaining at sea off the East Coast, West Coast, and Gulf Coast, with nearly 80,000 crew on board." So what are these crew members doing? With no passengers, many are just biding their time. In fact, there are many on staff who are no longer working, but they can't easily get back home with the travel restrictions currently in place. Unfortunately, there are cases of some crew members getting sick with COVID-19. In recent weeks, several crew members aboard various ships have died from the illness, according to the Miami Herald. Number 5, the cruise suspension didn't mean all ships stopped sailing. While new cruises from the United States were halted back in March, not every ship stopped sailing immediately. It wasn't in order that all ships at sea immediately stop and turn back home. Instead, ships that are already sailing continued on their trips. In some cases, these cruises were scheduled to sail lengthy journeys that spanned weeks. That's why even well after the cruise suspension was announced, there were regular stories of more cruise ships having trouble docking due to coronavirus fears. The sixth thing you might not know about the cruise suspension is that these suspensions have actually been extended again and again. When the cruise suspensions were first announced back in mid-March, it was planned to go on for only 30 days until mid-April. Now that's proven far too optimistic. Since the suspension announcement, there have been two major rounds of extensions. The first time, the suspension for many lines went from the middle of April to the middle of May. Another round was recently announced by the major cruise lines that are now aiming for a return in mid-June all the way to early July. Even so, that may still be optimistic. Remember, with the CDC no sail order, it seems possible that more extensions may be needed before trips get back to sailing. Number 7. 25 different cruise ships were affected by the virus in the United States. Now, obviously this crisis has hit cruising hard, and there have been lots of headlines about ships and the virus. As for the official numbers, the CDC says that 25 ships with ports of call in the United States were affected with cases of COVID-19. Of those, 13 ships had travelers on board with symptoms who tested positive for the virus. The other ships had travelers that tested positive and showed symptoms within 14 days of the cruise, but not while on board. These people could have caught the illness elsewhere. Now, there's no official count that we know of regarding the number of people that were sickened on these 25 cruises, but it does show how widespread the impact has been. And the eighth and final thing that you might not have known about cruise suspensions is that the Alaskan cruise season has been hit especially hard. The Alaskan's cruise season normally runs from about May through September. With the cruise suspension, it's already been hit hard, but Canada has also announced that it won't allow ships to dock until at least July 1st. Now, why does that hurt cruises to Alaska? U.S. laws require foreign flag ships, which most cruise ships are, to make a stop in a foreign port before returning back to the United States to conclude a cruise. Many of these ships stop in Victoria, Canada at the end of their Alaskan cruise to meet this requirement. But without being able to stop in Canada, these Alaskan cruises can't sail according to U.S. rules. Until Canada lifts its ban on cruise ships, the Alaskan cruise season is on hold. Now that wraps up the 8 surprising things about the cruise suspension. If you have any questions, please put them below. We'll try our best to get to them. As well, be sure to like this video and subscribe. You can also get the latest on this and all the other cruise stories at Cruzely.com.